Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The barrel of the gun was cold against my forehead, but not as cold as the eyes of the man holding it, the same man I had spoon-fed soup to just 3 hours ago. You, he whispered, his voice a jagged shard of the elegance it once possessed. You are the one who caged me. The rain outside hammered against the corrugated metal roof of my workshop, a rhythmic drumming that usually lulled me to sleep, but now sounded like a countdown. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't beg. I just looked at the beautiful, broken creature I had dragged out of the mud and thought, I should have left you to die in the scrap heap 2 weeks earlier. The Sector 4 scrapyard was a graveyard for the city's excess. It was where the neon lights of the upper spire came to die, filtered down through the smog until they were just flickering ghosts reflecting off pools of oily water. I was a salvager. I picked through the bones of the city, finding copper coils, intact biocircuits, and rare alloys that the elite threw away without a second thought. I liked the quiet. I liked the rust. It was honest. I was waist deep in the carcass of a decommissioned transport drone when I saw him. At first, I thought he was a mannequin, some synthetic pleasure doll discarded because of a scratch on the silicone. He was lying face down in a pile of severed cables and jagged sheet metal. The rain had plastered his shirt, silk, torn, expensive, to a back that was too broad, too muscular for a standard synth. I climbed down, my boots squelching in the toxic sludge. I intended to check his pockets. In Sector 4, morality was a luxury we couldn't afford. If he was dead, his cufflinks alone would feed me for a month. I turned him over. Lightning flashed, illuminating a face that stopped my breath in my throat. Even smeared with grease and blood, he was devastating. High cheekbones that could cut glass, lashes that fanned out against pale skin, and a jawline that spoke of stubborn arrogance. But it was the wound at his temple, a nasty, sluggishly bleeding gash, that drew my eye. He wasn't a synth. He was human, and he was breathing. Help? He rasped, the word barely a ghost of sound. I froze. Helping was dangerous. Helping a man wearing a shirt that cost more than my entire workshop was suicide. This was a hit. A disposal. If the people who dumped him here found out he was alive, they wouldn't just finish the job, they'd erase anyone who had touched him. I looked at his wrist. A platinum watch, shattered. I looked at his neck. A faint bruising pattern, garrote marks. Leave him, Kalen, I muttered to myself, gripping my pry bar. Walk away. His hand moved, fingers twitching, blindly reaching out until they brushed the toe of my boot. It was such a pathetic, desperate gesture. A king reaching for a peasant. I cursed, a long string of obscenities that echoed off the mountains of trash. I couldn't do it. I was a scavenger, a thief, and a liar, but I wasn't a monster. I slung his heavy arm over my shoulder. He groaned, his head lolling against my neck. He smelled of rain, iron, and expensive sandalwood cologne. You better be worth the trouble, I grunted, dragging his dead weight toward my hover skiff. I didn't know it then, but I had just picked up a nuclear warhead and carried it into my living room. My home was a fortified garage converted into a living space. It smelled of motor oil and old coffee. I laid him on the surgical table I usually used for repairing illegal cybernetics. Under the harsh halogen lights, the damage was worse. He had been beaten. Badly. His ribs were a canvas of purples and blacks. There were defensive wounds on his forearms. But the head wound was the primary concern. I stripped him. It wasn't sexual, not then. It was practical. I had to assess the damage. But as I peeled away the tattered silk and sodden trousers, I couldn't help but notice the perfection of his physique. He was built like a weapon. Lean muscle, scarred skin, power coiled tight even in unconsciousness. On his left pectoral, right over his heart, was a tattoo. A stylized serpent wrapping around a sword. I dropped the scissors. The crest of the Valerius family. The syndicate kings of the upper spire. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had brought the heir of the city's most ruthless crime family into my hidden sanctuary. This wasn't just a stray dog. This was a wolf. A wolf that my own family had spent generations hiding from. The smart thing to do, the logical thing, would be to put a bullet in his brain right now. The Valerius family were butchers. They owned the police, the politicians, and the air we breathed. If he woke up and remembered me, I was dead. If his enemies found him here, I was dead. I looked at the gun on my workbench. Then I looked at him. He shivered, a small, pained sound escaping his lips. He looked so human. Stripped of his suits and his guards and his reputation, he was just a man bleeding out on a metal table. Damn it, I whispered. I grabbed the medkit. I stitched the gash on his temple. I set his broken fingers. I cleaned the blood from his pale skin with warm water and a sponge, tracing the lines of muscles that rippled as he flinched in his sleep. For 3 days, he burned with fever. I didn't sleep. I sat by his side, wiping sweat from his brow, forcing water between his cracked lips. I found myself talking to him, telling him things I hadn't told anyone. You have nice hands, I murmured on the second night, holding his large hand in mine. Too soft for work. These are hands that sign death warrants, aren't they? On the 4th day, the fever broke. I was across the room, welding a joint on a prosthetic leg, when I felt eyes on me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I turned. He was sitting up. The sheet had pulled at his waist. His eyes were open. They were the color of storm clouds, gray, turbulent, and utterly void of recognition. Who are you? He asked. His voice was rough and used. I lifted my welding mask. I'm the guy who stitched your head back together. He looked around the cluttered workshop, his gaze sharp, analyzing exits, weapons, threats. It was instinctual, muscle memory of a predator. Then he looked at his own hands, turning them over as if they belonged to a stranger. And who am I? He asked, looking up at me. The lie formed on my tongue instantly. I couldn't tell him he was Caspian Valerius, the prince of crime. If I did, he might try to leave. Or worse, he might try to kill me to tie up loose ends. I found you in the scrapyard, I said, walking closer, keeping my hands visible. You don't remember? He squeezed his eyes shut, clutching his head. No. It's empty. Just noise. And pain. I looked for ID. I lied smoothly. You didn't have any. He looked at me, searching my face for deceit. He was terrifyingly intense. So, I am no one. You're someone, I said, handing him a mug of water. You're just rebooting. Until you remember, I'm calling you Ren. Run, he tested the name. It sounded soft in his mouth. And you? Kalen. Kalen, he repeated. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, the air in the room grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that had nothing to do with the storm outside. You saved me, Kalen. Don't thank me yet. I turned away, my heart doing a traitorous flip. You still owe me for the medical supplies. Living with Run was like living with a domesticated tiger. You could pet him, feed him, but you never forgot that he could tear your throat out if you remembered how. The amnesia was total. He remembered skills. He could dismantle a gun in seconds. He spoke 3 languages fluently, and he moved with a fluid, lethal grace, but he had no context for them. He didn't know why he knew how to kill a man with a spoon. He just knew he could. And he was clingy. Perhaps it was the trauma, or perhaps it was just that I was the only anchor he had in a world of fog, but Ren followed me everywhere. When I worked on scavenged engines, he sat nearby, handing me tools before I even asked for them. When I cooked, he watched me with a hunger that wasn't just about food. Why do you live like this? He asked one evening. We were sitting on the roof of the workshop, watching the rain wash the grime off the city. Like what? Hidden. Alone. He shifted closer, his shoulder brushing mine. The heat radiating off him was intoxicating. Safety, I said. The world down here eats people who are soft. Or loud. Ren looked at his hands. I feel like I wasn't soft. Before. No, I said softly. I don't think you were. He turned to me. The city lights reflected in his gray eyes. I think I was a bad man, Kalen. Maybe. Does it bother you? I looked at his lips. They were full, healing from the dryness of the fever. It should. He reached out, his fingers grazing my cheek. His touch was hesitant, gentle, a stark contrast to the violence I knew he was capable of. But it doesn't. No, I breathed. He leaned in. The kiss was tentative at first, a question. But when I didn't pull away, he groaned low in his throat and deepened it. He tasted of rain and desperation. His hands, those hands that had signed death warrants, tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, anchoring me to him. It was a slow burn that exploded into an inferno. We stumbled back into the workshop, shedding clothes, skin against skin, the cold air of the garage forgotten in the heat of our bodies. He made love like he was starving. There was a possessiveness to him, a dominant edge that the amnesia hadn't erased. He pinned me to the mattress, his eyes devouring me, making me feel exposed and worshipped all at once. "You're mine," he whispered against my neck, biting down lightly on the sensitive skin. I don't know who I was, but I know this. You belong to me. For 2 weeks, we lived in a bubble. I let myself pretend. I let myself pretend that he wasn't Caspian Valerius. I let myself pretend that we could stay like this forever, just two broken things fitting together perfectly in the dark. But reality has a way of kicking down the door. I went to the market in Sector 3 to buy food. I left Ren at the workshop with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone. The giant holographic screens that floated above the market square were usually playing ads for synthetic joy sims or nutrient paste. Today they were red. Breaking news, Syndicate War erupts. I froze. The face on the screen was younger, sharper, cleaner. But it was him. Caspian Valerius, heir to the Valerius Empire, presumed dead. Rival family, the Ouroboros claims responsibility. Reward for information, 10 million credits. The crowd around me buzzed with excitement. 10 million. Enough to buy a ticket to the off-world colonies. Enough to live like a god. But that wasn't what stopped my heart. It was the ticker scrolling beneath the image. Valerius enforcers sweeping Sector 4. Scorched earth policy initiated. No witnesses. They weren't looking for him to save him. The internal coup that had tried to kill him was finishing the job. They were burning the haystack to find the needle. I dropped my bag of groceries. Ren. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned, dodging through alleyways, vaulting over trash heaps. If the enforcers found him, they would kill him. If they found him with me, they would torture me first. But worse. If he saw them, if the violence triggered him. I burst into the workshop, soaking wet, gasping for air. Run, I screamed. The workshop was dark. Too dark. Run, we have to go? They're coming. I stumbled toward the living quarters. The silence was heavy, thick with threat. Then the lights flickered on. He was standing in the center of the room. But he wasn't Ren anymore. He was wearing a suit. One of my old ones, ill-fitting, but he wore it like armor. He had found his watch. He had found the gun I kept hidden in the floorboards. He turned to face me. The softness was gone. The confusion was gone. His eyes were cold, hard steel. He raised the gun. Welcome back, I whispered, the blood draining from my face. You, he said, and the voice wasn't raspy anymore. It was commanding, imperious. You knew. Run, listen, my name, he interrupted, cocking the hammer, is Caspian. And you have held me prisoner here for 14 days. I saved your life. I shouted, stepping forward despite the gun. I pulled you out of the trash. You were dying. And you kept me in the dark, he roared, his composure cracking for a second. You let me play house. You let me touch you. While you knew exactly who I was. I was protecting you. Or maybe you were keeping a pet, he sneered. A trophy. The Valerius heir, cleaning your floors. The sound of shattering glass interrupted us. A canister of tear gas smashed through the skylight. Smoke hissed, filling the room instantly. Breach. Breach. A mechanical voice amplified from outside. Target identified. Terminate on sight. Red laser sights cut through the smoke, dancing over Caspian's chest. He didn't flinch. He didn't look at the window. He looked at me. Do you trust me? I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at the gun in his hand, then at the lasers, then back at me. The conflict in his eyes was a war zone. The memories of Caspian Valerius fighting against the feelings of Ren. Give me a reason not to kill you and walk out that door, he hissed. Because they're here to finish what they started, I said, grabbing a shotgun from under the workbench. And because I'm the only one who knows the way out. The front door exploded inward. 6 men in tactical gear stormed in, weapons raised. They weren't police. They were cleaners from the Ouroboros syndicate. Caspian moved. It was terrifying. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. He shot the first man in the throat before the debris from the door even hit the floor. He used the falling body as a shield, advancing with a fluidity that was almost inhuman. I pumped the shotgun, blasting a mercenary who tried to flank him. Cover left. Caspian barked. A command, not a request. We moved back to back. The dynamic shifted instantly. We weren't enemies. We were partners. The rhythm we had established in domesticity translated seamlessly to violence. I knew where he would move before he moved. He covered my blind spots as if he could see through my eyes. The workshop became a slaughterhouse of sparks and gunfire. When the last man fell, the silence that followed was deafening. Caspian stood amidst the wreckage of my home, breathing hard. Blood, not his, spattered his face. He looked at the bodies, then he looked at me. The adrenaline faded, leaving the cold reality between us. He walked over to me. I didn't raise my shotgun. If he was going to kill me, I wouldn't stop him. I was too tired. He stopped inches from me. He reached out, his hand gripping my chin, tilting my head up. His thumb wiped a smear of soot from my cheek. It was the same touch he had used the night before, possessive and firm. You lied to me, he said quietly. Yes. You stripped me of my identity. I gave you a new one. A safer one. He searched my eyes. The ice in his gaze was melting, revealing the storm underneath. I remember everything, Kalen. I remember the empire I run. I remember the people I've killed. I know. But, he stepped closer, pressing his body against mine, the heat of him searing through our wet clothes. I also remember the soup. I remember the way you hum when you weld. I remember how you taste. My breath hitched. Caspian. Run is dead, he declared, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. But Caspian Valerius pays his debts. He leaned down, his lips brushing against my ear. You saved my life. By the laws of the syndicate, my life belongs to you. But you kept me. You made me yours. He pulled back, his eyes dark with a hunger that terrified and thrilled me. So now, I am taking what is mine. You aren't a scavenger anymore, Kalen. You're coming with me. Back to the spire. I don't belong in the spire, I protested weakly. You belong where I am, he growled. He holstered his gun and grabbed my hand, interlacing our fingers. His grip was iron. There was no asking. There was only taking. He pulled me toward the exit, stepping over the bodies of the men who had tried to kill us. We have a kingdom to burn down, he said, looking back at me with a smirk that promised chaos. And I need my queen by my side. As we walked out into the rain, leaving the ruins of my simple life behind, I realized something terrifying. I hadn't just saved a wolf. I had let him taste blood. And now, he was going to eat the whole world. And he was taking me to dinner. And that is how the scavenger unwittingly crowned the king of the underworld. If you enjoyed seeing Caspian switch from vulnerable stray to ruthless warlord, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a lover who pointed a gun at your head the moment their memory returned? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,